Thank you. Thank you very much. As you know, the length of somebody's title is directly proportional to their power and influence. President, powerful. Senator, powerful. So I'm pleased to be the acting assistant secretary of the Administration for Children and Families. Now, I really want to thank Casey, and I want to thank all the foster youth who have brought so much to the table. I want to thank the Foster Care Policy Council, who has been advising us, and if you've not seen the recommendations, I encourage you to do that because I think we can take so much guidance from it. But I also want to thank the four youth that we just heard from. And I'm so pleased, particularly that Tiffany and Ryan talked about their moms. And I think that's one of the things in the child welfare system that we so many times fail to recognize, is that mom may have a substance use problem, she may have a mental illness, but it doesn't fundamentally mean that she doesn't love her child. And I think that's something that we've got to recognize. One thing about child welfare financing reform, and I'm pleased that Ryan brought that up, is right now in the system, the federal government pays states X amount of dollars for every child they have in care. Where's the incentive to keep kids out of care? Where's the incentive to keep families together? And one of the reasons I think we in Florida were able to really begin to bring down the rolls was because we got a waiver from that financing scheme. We're the only statewide waiver at the time in the country. Because what it basically does to the states, it says we're going to pay you a block amount of money to run child welfare, and you can spend that money on the family, not just the child. So you don't have to bring the child into care. Mom has a substance use problem, and you can keep that child safe. Let's figure out how to deal with that substance use problem. The program Susan B. Anthony in Fort Lauderdale, where if mom has a serious substance use problem, mom goes into residential treatment, but the child stays with mom and keeps that bond together. And I think that's something very important to really try to promote. Los Angeles has a similar waiver. We rolled out 9 additional waivers last year, and we'll roll out another 10 this year to give states the flexibility to really make the kind of decisions that are right for parents and right for children. When I'm a lawyer by trade, and when I became I ran against our governor for education commissioner, and he was a Republican, I was a Democrat, and obviously I lost. But when he became governor, he asked me to be secretary of the Department of Children and Families. I think that was his way of getting back at me. But when I went into the department, I had some knowledge about child welfare. I had some knowledge about early childhood development. But about a month into that, a woman, Andrew Moore, asked me to meet with a group of foster kids who aged out. It's called Florida Youth Shine. I think we've got like 4 members here from Florida Youth Shine. So it was one of those kind of things. It was on the calendar. It was after work. So I thought, well, I'll stop by for 20 minutes or so, and maybe make a few comments. And 2.5 hours later, I learned more about the child welfare system than I've learned from all the professionals. And I'm not taking anything away from professionals. But one of the problems is that we designed a whole child welfare system in this country, and we never talked to kids. And that's the reason I reached out to Casey and said, can't we put together a group outside of the federal government that's really independent of us to really help us as to where we really ought to go in terms of federal policy in child welfare. You know, I learned that from that group of about 12 or 15 young people in Florida about their experiences. I remember talking to a young woman who was 30. She had a child. She'd grown up in foster care. She was working on her master's degree. And I said, you know, with everything you went through, how did you get here? How did you come out like you did? And her response was pretty simply, well, I guess I'm just stubborn. And sometimes that's what it's about. It's the essence that I'm not going to let all this crap take me down. And I'm going to do something about it. And so we began every advisory group that I put together, every policy council that we put together. I insisted that we have at least 2 young people on that group who were directly involved in those issues. I set up a group. They were judges and lawyers and protective investigators and advocates and case managers, and I put a young person who was about 15, who was in the child welfare system, and someone who had aged out. And I remember I sat in the back of the room when they were having it. They met several times, but I sat in the back of the room one time. The subject was runaways. How do we keep kids from running? How do we find them? Do we take DNA evidence? And finally, that went on for about 30 minutes at this kind of academic level. Then this young 15-year-old said, well, I may not know a lot about this, but maybe we ought to find out why they're running in the first place. And it was like an epiphany. And it's that kind of direct question that we need to be asking professionals in the field. Because I really believe that it's important to have kids at the table, because quite frankly, pretty soon it's going to be their table. Pretty soon, when I'm in my wheelchair and I'm old, and I'm going to be coming lobbying one of you as a member of Congress, or you're going to be handling my will, or you're going to be, and this isn't just trite. The reality is, you represent really the future of this country, and the experiences that you've had will make the system better. I remember meeting a young man by the name of Andrew Bridge, who lives now in Los Angeles. He was in care for 11 years. His mom, substance abuser, schizophrenic, and he was removed. And he happened to be one of the lucky ones. I mean, early on, he was in McAllen, a notoriously bad boys' home in Los Angeles for about a year. And then he went into a foster home and was in that foster home for about 10 years, aged out. And it was a foster home, as he articulates, that were Holocaust survivors. So there was not a whole lot of warmth. And so he immersed himself in academics. He ultimately graduated cum laude from Harvard Law School, and now practices child welfare law and has an advocacy organization in Los Angeles. But he wrote a book called Hope's Boy. Have any of you familiar with it? He wrote a book in there where he talks about his mom. And he said, my mom was basically a failure as a mom. But there was never a doubt in my mind that she loved me. And I loved her. And he told me that she's now in a group home for people with mental illness in Los Angeles. And he remembers that as a boy, 7, 8 years old, that he would, she'd say, I'll be home around 9. And he'd go out and wait on the sidewalk until 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning for mom to come home. Well, now she's in a group home. And he told me recently that one day he called up and said, Mom, on Sunday I'm going to come out and see you. I'll get there around noon. Well, he didn't get there until about 1:30. She was out on the sidewalk waiting for him. And I think what Tiffany and Ryan talked about is that transition of all this. The other piece of this that I really learned from kids is, I spoke one day to about 250 foster parents. And after the meeting, several of those foster parents came up to me and said, we're having difficulties with your dangerous activities are. I said, we don't have dangerous activities. She said, yes, you do. I said, no, we don't. She said, yes, you do. It turns out we did. We had this woman who was about 4 tiers down in the department who would approve activities that foster kids could participate in. Johnny can participate in Boy Scouts, but he can't participate in archery. And it was amazing what we were doing. Sally wants to do a sleepover with a best friend right down the street who the foster parents know well. And they were requiring a background check, fingerprinting, and home study on that sleepover parent. It really is about being normal. So we didn't get rid of the woman, we moved her. I think she run the processing food stamps. But we created a normalcy czar to really try to say that kids ought to live in a normal environment as we can. We know how to keep kids safe. It's actually quite simple. Take them away from their parents, lock them in a room, give them 3 hot meals and a bed to sleep on. They're going to be safe, but they're going to age out of care without a high school education, without the kind of social skills, without the basic kinds of involvement that kids need in that growing up process. Right after that meeting, I went and met with a group of maybe 50 kids who were in foster care. And said a few words, and then I said, let me hear from you. If you were in my position and could do anything that you wanted to improve the foster care system, what would it be? And I remember this young man, who probably wasn't over 13, stood up and he said, stop calling us foster kids, we're just kids. And I think that's a basic message that we need to send to the child welfare system. One of the things, and I really attribute this to a group of young people like you, last year who came to Washington and informally lobbied their members of Congress and talked about the disconnect in education, the disconnect between kids being in care and the records not following them, foster parents not really knowing what's happening in school. And remarkably, and I've never seen Congress act this fast, and that's, if any members of Congress are still here, I apologize. But frankly, within about 4 months, Congress had rewritten the statute, and it was alluded to this morning, rewritten the statute because the federal education confidentiality requirements prohibited the child welfare system from knowing anything about the educational records of a child. And yet, child welfare systems were mandated to track kids and their educational progress. And because of folks like you, Congress listened, and the President signed the Uninterrupted Scholars Act. Congresswoman Bass was a big part of that. Senator Mary Landrieu was a big part of that. A lot of the members of Congress that were here. So I, first of all, really want to thank you I want to thank Casey for what they're doing. And I'm not sure I need to even tell you this, but I want you to continue to have the outspoken advice, criticism, and pressure to really make this country's child welfare system a model for the world. Thank you very much.